This Bible Alive series is about becoming considerate Bible readers to our Middle Eastern ancestors in the faith. Offering a social science commentary on the Gospel according to John. Presenting an historically sensitive cross-cultural comparative set of glasses, in which to see and hear and read the Gospel of John as its original audience did. Attempting to interpret John in a way that would be fair to its original author and audience. Maintaining attention and interest on important features of our modern world. The Gospel of John. We can break down an outline of the Gospel of John's structure like this. Prologue. The book of signs. The book of glory. Epilogue. And a later insertion. That's your outline to the Gospel according to John. And as we go through it, we're going to come back again and again to this outline. As we go through the individual sections, I'll open it up a little bit further to detail the actual part of John that we're in so that you might better understand it. Basically, it's these 5 parts that I want you to be aware of. And for a while, for 5 weeks at least, we're going to be in the first part, the prologue, which scholars have called the Hymn of the Logos, a poem about the Messiah's cosmic status. Today we are in that part that's highlighted in red. The Word in God becomes the light of the world. John chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. That's what we're focusing on today. The next 2 weeks we're focusing on B and C of that outline. After about 5 weeks, we're going to get into the book of signs, which, as you can see, goes from chapter 1, verse 19, all the way to chapter 12, verse 50, detailing 7 signs, Jesus' great works, which reveal Jesus the revealer and reveal God working in him and in his word. The third part is the book of glory, which deals with Jesus' farewell discourse, or his farewell, his final farewell dinner with the inner group of his followers, and the passion and resurrection account. Chapter 13, verse 1, with the washing of the feet, all the way to chapter 20, verse 31, and the resurrection appearance to Thomas. And chapter 20, verse 31, folks, is where the original gospel ended. But then the charismatic leader of the Johannine Jesus group died, and the community perhaps began to disintegrate. So it was necessary to craft an epilogue, the 4th part in this outline, which was the group's attestation to the author's veracity, John's veracity. Why we should believe in him, and maybe also why we should get with the Petrine Jesus groups, because we're falling apart. Hence, Peter is featured there more admirably than he is in the previous chapters of the Gospel according to John. In chapter 21, Peter is made like a shepherd, like Jesus, the good shepherd. Feed my sheep and so forth, and follow in my footsteps. Finally, there is the strange later insertion, which is John chapter 7, verse 53 to chapter 8, verse 11. A story that was too good to pass up, too good to lose, that really doesn't belong in the gospel called John. It's the wonderful story of Jesus rescuing the woman caught in adultery. It is foreign to the text of John, and it was shoehorned into the text where it does not belong. That's the last thing we'll cover in this study as we go through these classes this summer and following into fall 2017. Any questions so far on that?
Didn't have it printed up?
The outline? I can get it for you. I can get you a detailed outline, and I'll get you, like I keep promising that I'll get you that bibliography. Today I was a little swamped. I'm sorry, our printers are... Forgive me, please. I am going to do. I will deliver on that. Moving right along. The first 18 verses in the fourth gospel present us with one of the most dense passages in all of the New Testament. This is an ancient Christian hymn, a poem, a synthesis of the author's theology and Christology. The prologue, John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18, plays a crucial role in the rhetoric of the gospel. Everything John wants to tell us, and I mean everything, is found in those 18 verses. Everything that follows those 18 verses is rehash. There's no further development. It doesn't go anywhere. It's all contained. Anything new he wants to tell us is in the first 18 verses of the gospel called John. Everything else is just another way of expressing it in a variety of ways: stories, anecdotes, sign stories. Everybody got that? So if you want to understand the gospel according to John, what do you need to understand?
First 18 verses.
Beautiful. Love you guys. Let's look at those first 18 verses, shall we? Here we go. John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was turned toward God. And what God was, the Word also was. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made. What took place in him was life, and the life was the light of humankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was Iones. He came for testimony, to bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light. The true light that enlightens everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world knew him not. He came to his own home, but his own people received him not. But to those who received him, who believed into his name, he gave power to become tekna Theou, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of a man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, the fullness of a gift that is truth. We have gazed upon his glory, doxa, as of the only Son from the Father. Iones bore witness to him and cried, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, for he was before me." And from his fullness have we all received a gift in place of a gift. For the law was given through Moses. The gift that is the truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. the only Son, who is turned toward the Father, he has made him known. And that's it, folks. Anything John wants to tell us is right there. The only additional information you'll get in this fourth gospel is in the appendix, chapter 21, the epilogue. Uh-oh, we're falling apart. The beloved disciple who is dead. We better get with those Petrine Jesus groups. And that clumsily added, shoehorned in insertion about the woman caught in adultery, which doesn't really belong in the text. Everything from chapter 1, verse 19, to chapter 20, verse 31, is all just a rehash of crabgrass.
All rhetoric.
I'm not saying it's worthless. It's wonderful. It's explaining and going into what we've already been told in verses 1 to 18. But it's nothing new.
It's an explanation.
It's just a continuation. It doesn't go anywhere. The language doesn't go anywhere. It's really overstatement.
Redundancy.
It is, in many ways. It's meant for interpersonal purposes. That's what the text is written. The text was not written for people outside this community. It was written for people inside this community. This gospel, really all the gospels and all the literature of the New Testament, was insider literature. It was not written to be copied at the cost of about $10,000, ancient equivalent, to be handed out on street corners to strangers. If that's true with the other 26 books in the New Testament, it's especially true with John. Like doubly true. Yes?
I noticed like
Fina.
in the Apostles' Creed, there's a lot of that.
Explain that to me. Fina says, she notices in the Apostles' Creed, there's a lot of that. You mean from John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18?
Yeah.
Could you give me an example? Somebody tell me the Apostles' Creed. Come on, you better know that, Catholics. What's the Apostles' Creed? That's not the Apostles' Creed. That's the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed.
Oh.
The profession of faith we do.
So we're talking about the Nicene Creed.
Oh.
God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Is that what is actually being expressed, metaphysical stuff in this poem? Certainly, the language rhymes and rings with it. But we'll have to look at what John actually meant before. Remember, the text had a meaning inside the community, which was an anti-society. Once the literature, this anti-language literature called John, was taken outside of the dominant society in which it was reacting to, the words would then be interpreted, even by other Jesus groups, according to common Mediterranean usage, not as anti-language terms. The original meaning, in other words, would have been lost. It would have been recontextualized.
Taken on a new meaning.
Taken on new meaning and used to argue against people like Arius in the 4th century. Was the text designed to argue against Arius, an Alexandrian priest, arguing about whether there was a time in which the sun was not? But it was used that way. It was used beyond its intentions. But that's all right. God works in the mess. The Johannine Jesus Group storyteller marks off the opening to this prologue or preface to the gospel we call John with a high context reference to hologos, the word. And arche in hologos. In the beginning was the word. This well-known logos or word was turned toward God, proston theon. God was generally located by Israelites in the 1st century on the other side of the vault or firmament of the solid sky. the highest or outermost sky vault. And the author closes his account of the first days of Jesus, chapter 1, verse 19 to 51, with reference to Jesus as the cosmic Son of Man, who offers access to the other side of the vault of the sky vault, the realm proper to God. Given the themes in this prologue, a good name for John's Antisociety, what they might call themselves, what would this Jesus group call themselves? Well, they would, if you look at the prologue very carefully, you'll see they probably call themselves tekna Theou, the children of God. John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18 is what we're looking at, folks, over these 5 weeks. These verses have caused both wonder and controversy throughout Christian history. Most modern scholars consider this passage to be a poem. When read as ordinary Mediterranean language, these words are majestic and profound, yet bristling with interpretive and theological difficulties. Was this poem part of the original gospel? Was it composed by the beloved disciple, the man we call John? Or was it a later addition? Does an early messianic hymn lie behind it that the gospel was then constructed around? Or was it composed later as a summary of the gospel? In other words, was chapter 1, verses 1 to 19, all the way to chapter 20, verse 31 written, and then somebody decided to distill it all into the first 18 verses and slap that header on it? Or did this poem exist as a hymn in some form, and then the gospel was constructed around that? Interesting.
Isn't this the beginning of Genesis also?
Is it? Rose said something very interesting. She asked the question, isn't this the beginning of Genesis? Why would you say that, Rose? Why would you compare, why would you relate this text to Genesis?
When you read Genesis, it starts off.
When you read Genesis, Bereshith bara Elohim, Bereshith means in the beginning in Hebrew. And in arche is in the beginning. It's the Greek translation of Bereshith. Right, in the beginning. In the beginning created God the heavens and the earth. In the beginning was the Word. How did God create the heavens and the earth? How did God create the sky vaults and the earth? Did he battle dragons to create the sky vaults and the earth, like in the other Mesopotamian myths? How did he create the sky vaults and the earth?
Made a big bang.
Okay, that's not how it goes. Yes, science would say that. That's fine. Science is great. But we're talking about religious, theological ways of looking at creation. How did God, that's a religious, right? Through what? What did God do to create things?
The Word.
He did what? What did he do, Eric? He spoke it into existence through 10 sayings. Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or. Vayehi Or. God said, let there be light. Actually, what it says is, God said, be light, Yehi Or. Light was. God said, let there be the sky vault, the firmament, right? The rakia, and there was the sky vault, right? And he goes on and on and on and on and on through the whole text. He keeps saying, it's always through a saying. We have to remember that all theology is analogy, all analogy is rooted in human experience, and all human experience is culturally specific. In the Middle East of the first century, and in many places of the Middle East to this day, boys are fed milk by their mothers till very late, till after they can speak. And they're spoiled until they're about 12 years old by all the women of the village. Girls don't have a childhood there. All boys have to do is say milk, and they get milk. So you can see how this culture could develop a theology where God speaks, and it happens. That's how that theology developed. All theology is analogy. All analogy is rooted in human experience. All human experience is culturally specific. In the beginning was the saying. The Word. Interesting.
Any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Trying to figure out what possessed God to say he wanted to create.
Oh, that's a very deep and wonderful question. Meister Eckhart, the great mystic, says, God enjoys God's self, and God wills that we should also.
He was bored and he wanted to be
Nope.
No.
God didn't have to create us. He didn't have to create anything. He wasn't lonely and he wasn't bored. We believe God is interpersonal communion from all eternity. An eternal dance, an eternal place of life-giving love, which is interpersonal, right? So God doesn't need anybody else.
You tried to
Infinite.
sit down and think.
Yeah.
At what point did he say, let me create?
That's another thing. That's another thing, Rose. There is no point. Because God is an eternal now. There is no before and after. So there's no time to be bored or lonely.
Everybody needs toys.
But God did not create us to be toys or to be slaves, or robots. God created us to share in the divine life. God created human beings so that human beings might become God.
But something went wrong.
And yet and yet God continues with plan A. There is no plan B.
Us, not with him, with us.
Sure. And there is no, and still he continues with plan A for us. God created human beings so that human beings might be divinized. That is salvation. To be fully human is to be the image and likeness of God. To participate in the... Huh?
The good news.
That's the good news in the fullness.
Is this the first time he did it, or did he do it previously?
There's no time. God expresses God's self eternally, the church teaches.
Well, is this the only world he made?
No, there could be many worlds.
With people?
Yeah, there could be many worlds, but those worlds are not, let's try again. This is a separate issue than what we're talking about in class for John, but you see how reactive the text is to us. We read it and immediately our minds and our hearts begin leaping. It's like, oh, wait a minute, this is interesting. We're talking about creation. For what purpose creation?
Because it says in the beginning, so you say, okay.
What is the beginning, by the way?
There is no beginning.
If there's a beginning, there has to be time. And we get caught into these things, but we're going to see as the text goes on that other cultures have different understandings of time and beginning than we do. We have a modern post-industrial understanding of time. So we think of things as histories, like salvation history, and we think of things like novels, which developed at that time, by the way, right? Beginning, middle, end, and a chronological story. But a lot of cultures don't think of time in a linear way, and we have to look at that. So interesting stuff. Mary, you want to?